"I think you're in the wrong cabin, son. Economy is back there." These were the words Captain Matteo Jensen said to Elijah Vance, a man whose hands, stained with the faintest trace of engine grease, were about to become the only thing keeping Wastenaho 45 passengers, including Captain Jensen, from falling 30,000 feet out of the sky. The pilot saw a black mechanic in first class and decided to mock him. He had no idea that in less than an hour he would be on his knees, begging that same mechanic to save his aircraft, a plane the pilot himself had broken. The Apex Sky Club at JFK's Terminal 7 was a world of hushed tones, polished marble, and the gentle clink of expensive glassware. For Elijah Vance, it felt like wearing a suit that was 3 sizes too nice. He sat awkwardly on a low, minimalist leather sofa, his canvas backpack, the one he usually tossed into the back of his Ford F-150, resting by his feet like a misbehaving dog. He tugged at the collar of his new, crisp polo shirt. He'd scrubbed his hands for 20 minutes, but he could still see a phantom shadow of hydraulic fluid under his left thumbnail. It was a mechanic's stigma, a mark of his trade he usually wore with pride. But here it felt like an accusation. Elijah was an aviation maintenance technician, level 4, certified in airframe, power plant, and advanced avionics. He didn't just fix planes, he understood them. He could listen to a landing gear retraction and tell you if the hydraulic actuator was half a psi low. He loved the raw power, the smell of jet fuel, the intricate billion-dollar dance of physics that lifted 400 tons of metal into the sky. He was flying first class for the first and, he assumed, the last time. 2 weeks ago, he had won the Global Apex Airlines Maintenance Excellence Award for diagnosing a fleet-wide flaw in the 777's slat retraction sensor, a discovery that had saved the company an estimated $20 million in potential recalls. The award came with a $10,000 bonus and 2 international first-class tickets. He'd immediately cashed the check and wired it to his sister, Sarah, in London. She was sick, the kind of sick that doctors spoke about in quiet, sympathetic voices. The bonus would cover her experimental treatment at the Bupa Cromwell Hospital for 2 months. The ticket was his one chance to see her, maybe for the last time. So here he was, feeling like a fraud, waiting for Global Apex Flight 108 to London Heathrow. He watched the lounge's inhabitants, men in tailored suits typed furiously on MacBooks, their expressions severe. Women with immaculate hair sipped champagne, laughing quietly. They all moved with an unconscious entitlement, a smoothness that came from never having to wonder if they belonged. Then he walked in. Captain Matteo Ellington Jensen. Elijah knew him, not personally, but by reputation. Jensen was aviation royalty. His father was a legendary Pan Am captain, his grandfather a W-2 bomber pilot. Jensen flew the flagship 737-300ER with an arrogance that the ground crew despised. He was notorious for kicking the can, deferring non-essential maintenance, MELs, to ensure his on-time departure record remained pristine. To pilots like Jensen, mechanics were just grease monkeys, a necessary inconvenience. Jensen, tall and silver-haired, with a chiseled jaw and his perfectly pressed uniform, held court by the barista station. He was telling a story, his voice booming just loud enough to be clearly heard. "So I tell the tower, if you can't give me 31L, I'll just declare minimum fuel, and you can deal with the paperwork." They gave me the runway. His co-pilots and a few flight attendants laughed, perhaps a little too eagerly. Elijah stood up to get a bottle of water. He navigated the plush chairs, his backpack feeling heavier by the second. He reached the counter just as Jensen turned. For a second, their paths were blocked. Elijah instinctively stepped back. "Excuse me, Captain." Jensen's eyes, a cold, pale blue, flicked over Elijah. They didn't just see him, they assessed him. They took in the polo shirt, the work-worn hands, the canvas backpack, and the color of his skin. Jensen's lip curled in a smile that held no warmth. "Just getting a coffee," Jensen said, not to Elijah, but to the co-pilot beside him. He turned his broad back, stepping directly in front of Elijah to address the barista. "Double espresso, and make it quick, sweetheart. We've got a sky to rule." Elijah stood there, invisible. He felt a hot flush of anger, an old, familiar sting. He waited and waited. After Jensen and his entourage had moved on, Elijah finally grabbed his water and retreated to his corner. He just had to get through this. He had to get to Sarah. "Now boarding. Global Apex, Flight 108 to London. Beginning with our first-class passengers." Elijah slung his backpack over one shoulder, took a deep breath, and walked toward the gate, toward a confrontation he never asked for. The jet bridge for first class was separate, a plush, carpeted tunnel that led directly to the main door of the Boeing 777-300ER. Elijah's heart gave a familiar leap as he stepped onto the aircraft. He smelled the faint, clean scent of recycled air and saw the cool blue of the cabin lighting. This was his territory. He knew this specific aircraft. Tail number N774AP. He'd spent 72 hours in her EE, electronics and equipment, bay last month, tracing a ghost in the avionics. He knew her quirks. He knew her soul. A flight attendant, Chloe Davis, greeted him at the door with a brilliant professional smile. "Welcome aboard, sir. May I see your boarding pass?" Elijah handed it to her. Her smile widened, genuinely. "Ah, Mr. Vance. 2A. Right this way. It's our best window seat. Can I take your bag?" "No, thank you," Elijah said, unable to break the habit of handling his own gear. "I'll just put it up." He stepped into the first-class cabin. It was more like a small, futuristic hotel lobby than an airplane. Pods, not seats. Each had its own polished wood-grain console, a massive personal screen, and quilted leather. He found 2A, a luxurious cocoon by the window. He stowed his simple bag in the oversized overhead bin next to a sleek, aluminum Rimowa suitcase that probably cost more than his truck's transmission. He sat down. The seat was impossibly comfortable. He ran his hand over the console, feeling the smooth finish. For a second, the imposter syndrome faded, replaced by a shy thrill. He was really here. He was going to see Sarah. He was buckling his seatbelt when a shadow fell over him. "I think you might be a little lost, son." Elijah looked up. Captain Matteo Jensen was standing in the aisle, his uniform jacket now off, his pilot's hat tucked under his arm. His expression was one of amused condescension. Elijah blinked. "Excuse me, Captain?" "This is the first-class cabin," Jensen said, his voice low but carrying. The other passengers in their pods, the businessman, the woman with the pearls, were looking. Economy and premium economy are back through that curtain. The blood drained from Elijah's face, then returned in a hot, painful rush. No, I'm in the right seat." Jensen chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound. "Look, I'm sure it's a simple mistake. Just check your ticket. We can get you sorted out before we close the door." He was being publicly shooed, like a stray. Elijah's hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from a deep, vibrating rage. He held up his boarding pass. "Seat 2A, Captain. Elijah Vance." Jensen leaned in, squinting at the ticket as if it were a forgery. His eyes widened for a fraction of a second, registering the first-class designation before his mask of arrogance snapped back into place. "Well, I'll be," he said, loud enough for the cabin to hear. "They really are letting everyone up front these days. Must be a nice change from the hangar. He tapped a finger on Elijah's armrest, right near his hand. Just do us all a favor, Jensen smirked. Try not to get any grease on the upholstery. That leather is Italian. Elijah's jaw clenched so hard, a muscle jumped. He looked from Jensen's sneering face to Chloe, the flight attendant, who was standing a few feet away, her face a mask of horrified embarrassment. She looked at Elijah, her eyes pleading, "Please don't." Elijah took a breath, forcing the white-hot anger down. He would not make a scene. He would not give this man the satisfaction. He would not risk being removed from the flight. He had to get to Sarah. He met Jensen's cold blue eyes. "I'll be sure to use a napkin, Captain," Elijah said, his voice quiet and level. "Thank you for the advice. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'd like to settle in." For a second, Jensen looked surprised, as if he'd expected a different reaction, a protest, a stammer. He'd wanted to win, and this quiet dignity felt incomplete. He gave a sharp, dissatisfied sniff. "See that you do," he muttered. He turned and swaggered toward the cockpit, disappearing behind the reinforced door. The cabin was silent. The businessman abruptly went back to his laptop. The woman with the pearls stared intently out her window. Elijah was alone, the spotlight of his humiliation burning his skin. He leaned his head against the cool acrylic of the window, watching the baggage handlers, his colleagues, his brothers, loading the last of the bags in the rain. He felt a profound sense of dislocation, trapped between the world he came from and the world he was currently sitting in, welcomed by neither. Chloe, the flight attendant, approached his pod. Her face was kind. "Mr. Vance," she whispered, "can I get you a pre-departure beverage? We have champagne, or anything you'd like." Just a water, please, Chloe," he said, not looking at her. "Thank you." As she rushed off, Elijah closed his eyes. The plane gave a gentle lurch as the tug connected. The engines began to spool, a low, familiar whine that was, for the first time in his life, no comfort at all. The takeoff was textbook. The massive General Electric GE90 engines spooled up with a sound that Elijah felt more in his chest than his ears, a rising, soul-stirring roar of controlled power. N774AP rotated gracefully, lifting its 700,000-pound-plus bulk into the damp New York sky. Elijah tried to lose himself in the luxury. He ate the multi-course meal, a seared tuna appetizer, and a beef short rib that was more tender than anything he'd ever cooked. He watched a movie on the massive screen, but his mind kept replaying Jensen's words. Try not to get any grease on the upholstery. He was a level 4 technician. He was certified to sign off on engine core repairs. He'd once diagnosed a faulty AIMS, Airplane Information Management System, cabinet by listening to the pitch of its cooling fans, and he'd been reduced to a child's caricature, the dirty mechanic. 2 hours into the flight, they were over the black expanse of the North Atlantic. The cabin was dark, most passengers asleep in their lie-flat beds. Elijah, restless, had his pod in a half-recline, staring out the window at the brilliant, indifferent stars. That's when he felt it. It wasn't turbulence. Turbulence was a wave, a liquid motion. This was a vibration, a high-frequency, unnatural shudder that he felt through the floor, up his legs, and into his teeth. He muted his movie. The cabin was quiet, save for the steady rush of air. Then he heard it. Whoomp, whoomp, whoomp. It was a low, rhythmic thudding, coming from deep within the bowels of the plane, somewhere beneath the first-class galley. It was fast, like a machine struggling against itself. Elijah sat bolt upright, his blood running cold. His mechanic's brain, a vast library of sounds and sensations, was instantly flipping through catalogues of failure. It wasn't an engine. The N1 and N2 fan speeds would sound different. It wasn't the landing gear. They were locked. It wasn't the flaps. Whoomp, whoomp, whoomp. It was a sound he'd heard before, during a ground test on a 747. It was a hydraulic pump, but it wasn't a normal pump cycle. This was a hydraulic hammer. The pump was cycling rapidly, trying to build pressure against a system that was either blocked or, far worse, leaking. Suddenly, the bong chime echoed through the cabin. The seatbelt sign flickered on. A few passengers stirred, groaning. Elijah looked at Chloe, who was at the forward jump seat. Her eyes were wide, staring at the attendant indicator panel. A light was flashing. A cockpit call. She picked up the handset, her back to the cabin. "Yes, Captain?" "Understood." She hung up, her face pale. She began to move through the cabin, her voice strained but professional. "Ladies and gentlemen, the captain has asked that everyone return to their seats and fasten their seat belts. We're expecting some unexpected weather." Elijah knew she was lying. You didn't get hydraulic hammer from weather. Whump, whump, whump. The sound was getting louder, more violent. It was joined by a high-pitched, piercing whine. It was the sound of an electric motor under extreme, unlubricated duress. The pump was cavitating, sucking air, or it was about to seize entirely. Then, a new sensation. The plane yawed slightly, a subtle sickening slide to the left, then corrected itself with a jolt. Elijah's mind raced. Hydraulic system, rudder control, whump, whump, whump. The 777 has 3 hydraulic systems, left, right, and center, near C. The C system powers the primary flight controls, including the rudder, and its auxiliary pump, the AUX-C, was located directly below the forward galley, directly below him. "Oh no," Elijah whispered, his hands gripping the armrests. "No, no, no." The cockpit door burst open, and the first officer, David Reed, stumbled out. He didn't look at the passengers. He ran to Chloe. "Get me the crash axe," he yelled, his voice cracking with panic. "The panel in the EE bay. We can't get it open. It's jammed." Chloe's face went white. The EE bay. The C-system auxiliary pump is running away. It's overheating. And the sensor's gone blind. We have to pull the breaker manually, but the remote switch isn't working." Passengers were waking up, gasping, their sleepy confusion turning to terror at the sight of the panicked pilot. Elijah Vance unbuckled his seatbelt. He stood up in the aisle, a solid, immovable object in the middle of the rising chaos. "First Officer Reed," Elijah said, his voice a calm, deep baritone that cut through the noise. Reed spun around. "Who the hell are you? Sit down." "My name is Elijah Vance. I'm Apex A&P, employee 442921. You don't need the crash axe. You'll rupture a coolant line. The access panel isn't jammed. It's secured with 4 quarter-turn Zeus fasteners." Reed stared at him, dumbfounded. "What?" "And pulling the breaker won't solve your problem. Not if the pump is hammering." Elijah pointed to the floor. "That's not a runaway pump, sir. That's a massive hydraulic leak. And I think I know exactly which one." The 747 yawed again, more violently. A woman in 3D screamed. The high-pitched whine from below the floor escalated to a shriek, like metal tearing itself apart. First Officer David Reed, a young, by-the-book pilot just 2 years on the 777, was frozen. His training had scenarios for engine fires, for decompression, for stalls. It had nothing for the passenger in 2A, calmly diagnosing a catastrophic hydraulic failure. "What? Who? How do you?" Reed stammered. "I know this plane," Elijah said, already moving toward the forward galley. He pushed past the trembling cart. "N774AP. She's been logging intermittent faults on the C-system pressure transducer for 2 weeks. Chloe, the flight attendant, followed him. "Sir, you need to sit down." Elijah ignored her, his mind running calculations. The whoomp is the pump trying to charge the system. But the transducer is cracked. It's reading low pressure even when it's full. So the logic module keeps cycling the pump. It's also leaking Skydroll fluid all over the EEE bay. He turned to Reed, his eyes hard. "That shriek? That's the pump motor burning itself out. And when it seizes, it's going to flash ignite the atomized Skydroll. We'll have an uncontained fire in the electronics bay. We'll lose the C system, then the L and R as the fire burns. We'll be a 400-ton glider. We have minutes." Reed's face was ashen. "My God! The ECAS just says, Schwei-D pump, C fault. We've got no pressure reading." "Because the sensor is lying," Elijah snapped. He was in his element now. This was his hangar. "Get me on the phone with the captain. Now." Reed, his own authority completely shattered, stumbled back to the cockpit. The door opened. Elijah saw him shouting at the pilot's seat. A moment later, the cockpit door opened fully. Captain Matteo Jensen stood there, his face a mask of sweat and disbelief. He saw Elijah standing in the galley. His eyes, once so full of mockery, were now wide with terror. "What is this?" Jensen barked, his voice lacking its earlier boom. "Reed, get this passenger out of the galley." He's a mechanic, Matteo," Reed said. "He knows the plane. He says the sensor is—" "I don't care who he is," Jensen roared, grabbing the bulkhead for support as the plane shuddered. "He's a passenger, and he is violating the sterile flight deck. Get him." "Captain," Elijah's voice was like steel. It cut through Jensen's panic. "Do you remember signing off on Emil 2911CO1 for N774AP 5 days ago? Intermittent pressure transducer fault, center hydraulic system. You deferred it." Jensen's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Elijah had him. He knew he had him. He'd seen the logbook. He had argued with his own shift supervisor about it, insisting they ground the plane. The supervisor, intimidated by dispatch, had let it go, and the captain, the final authority, had signed the deferral. Matteo Jensen had traded 345 lives for an on-time departure. This wasn't just a failure. This was a crime. You, Jensen stammered. "There's no time," Elijah said, turning his back on the captain. He looked at Chloe. "In that forward closet, there's a T-handle key for the EE bay hatch. It's bright red. Get it." Chloe, seeing the total transfer of power, didn't hesitate. She ran to the closet. "Reed," Elijah commanded the first officer. "Go back to your seat. Keep this thing level. Your rudder is going to get sluggish. You're losing fluid fast. Tell me exactly what your ICAS screen says. Ignore the fault. What is the pressure reading for C system?" Reed scrambled back to the cockpit. His voice came over the cabin speaker a second later, using the intercom. "Vance, it's flashing. 0 PSI. 0. The whump stopped. It was replaced by a heavy clunk, and then silence. A profound, terrifying silence, broken only by the rush of the air outside. The plane immediately felt heavy. It began to wallow, slipping to the right. Elijah's stomach dropped. "The pumps seized," he whispered. "It's over." "Vance, what's happening?" Reed yelled over the speaker. "We've lost all C-system controls. Rudder is—" "It's gone. We're in alternate law." Chloe ran back, holding the T-handle key. "Here." Elijah grabbed it. "It's not over yet. Chloe, get me the headset from your jump seat. The long cord. I need to talk to the cockpit from below." He knelt in the galley. The other first-class passengers were staring, wide-eyed, from their pods. The man from 2A, the grease monkey, was now pulling up a panel of carpet, revealing a circular metal hatch. He looked up at Chloe. "Whatever happens, don't let him." He nodded toward the cockpit. "Touch anything. I'm talking to Reed." "Only Reed." He inserted the key, twisted, and pulled. The heavy hatch hissed open, revealing a dark, narrow ladder, descending into a nightmare of wires and howling wind. The smell of ozone and burning plastic billowed up, a funeral pyre in the sky. Elijah put the headset on. "First Officer Reed, this is Vance. I'm going in." "Godspeed, Vance," Reed's voice crackled, tinny and terrified. "Godspeed." Elijah swung his legs into the darkness and began to climb down. The EE, Electronics and Equipment Bay, was not designed for human comfort. It was a cramped, vibrating hell, packed with the aircraft's brains. Racks of avionics, circuit breaker panels, and junction boxes lined the walls, all glowing with faint green and amber lights. The noise was deafening, the roar of the slipstream just inches away, mixed with the screaming fans trying to cool the overheating processors. Elijah landed heavily on the metal floor. The air was thick and acrid. He was right. It was a nightmare. The center hydraulic, C system assembly, was in the aft corner of the bay. The auxiliary electric pump, the one that had just seized, was a metal canister about the size of a fire extinguisher. It was glowing a dull, cherry red. And it was wet. The pressure transducer, a small, sensor-covered block of metal, a Parker Hannifin model, 33B, Elijah's mind supplied, was mounted just above it. A hairline fracture had split its casing. From this crack, a fine, atomized mist of Skydroll hydraulic fluid was spraying directly onto the seized, red-hot pump casing. It hadn't flashed over. Not yet. The slipstream moving through the unpressurized bay was just barely keeping the temperature below its ignition point. But they were descending. As they hit thicker, warmer air, it would ignite. "Reed, can you hear me?" Elijah shouted into the headset mic. "Loud and clear, Vance. What do you see?" "I see the problem. The transducer is cracked and spraying fluid onto the seized pump. It's a bomb waiting to go off. We have to divert. Land. Now." "We're trying. Mateo. Captain Jensen is talking to Gander. It's the closest. But we're heavy, Vance. We're full of fuel. And we have no C system. We can't deploy flaps normally. We can't extend the landing gear normally. It's all on the C system." Elijah stared at the panel. Of course, the C system powered the alternate landing gear extension, the nose wheel steering, the primary flaps, slats. Without it, they'd have to land at over 200 knots, and they wouldn't be able to steer on the runway. They'd be a fireball. "We have to get the C system back," Elijah said, his mind racing faster than it ever had. "Even for 30 seconds. The pump is seized, Vance. It's dead." "The pump is dead," Elijah agreed, his eyes scanning the assembly. "But the fluid is still in the lines. The system is just locked. We don't need the pump. We need pressure." He saw it. Next to the main C system was a smaller, rarely used component. The ram air turbine, or RAT. It was a small propeller that, in a total emergency, would drop into the slipstream and spin, generating just enough hydraulic pressure to move the essential flight controls. "Reed, deploy the RAT," Elijah yelled. "The RAT? Vance, that's a last resort. It won't power the gear or flaps. Deploy the damn RAT. It will give us some pressure in the sea lines. It'll give you some rudder, but it won't stop this leak." There was a pause, then a deafening clunk that shook the entire airframe. A new, high-pitched scream joined the chorus as the turbine dropped into the 500 mm wind. On the panel in front of Elijah, a gauge flickered. 1,000 SI, 1,500, 2,000. It stopped. Not the full 3,000, but it was something. "Okay, Reed, you should have some feel in the rudder now. It's not much, but it's not zero." "Confirmed." Reed's voice was tight with effort. "We have sluggish control. Oh God, it's heavy. Now the fire." Elijah said, looking at the glowing pump and the atomized mist. The rat hadn't fixed that. The sea system was still leaking from the cracked sensor. He had to stop the spray from hitting the hot pump. He looked around the bay. Wires, boxes, manuals, no tools, no shields. He looked up. Through the hatch, he could see the plush carpet of the first-class galley. He saw Chloe's terrified face peering down. "Chloe!" he yelled. I need the ice bucket, the metal one, and all the ice, and the champagne, the bottle." "What?" "Just do it. And a towel, any towel." He was a madman. But she ran. A few seconds later, a silver ice bucket, a bottle of champagne, and a stack of linen napkins dropped onto the floor of the bay. He grabbed the ice bucket. It was perfect. He jammed it between two avionics racks, creating a crude metal shield that deflected the worst of the Skydroll spray away from the glowing pump. The caustic fluid immediately began to eat at the bucket's polished finish, but it was holding. The pump was still a fire hazard. He took the linen napkins, packed them with the ice, and began to plaster the ice-filled cloths onto the pump's casing. It sizzled violently, steam and a foul chemical smell filling the air. He was flash-cooling the seized motor. It was an insane, desperate, brilliant fix, a mechanic's improvisation. "Read!" he coughed, the fumes burning his throat. "The fire risk is contained. For now. The rat is giving you pressure, but the leak is worse. The rat is pushing fluid out of that crack faster." "Vance, how long?" Elijah looked at the gauge. The 2000 psi was already dropping. "You're bleeding out. The rat can't keep up with this leak. You have maybe 15 minutes of sea system pressure. 20, tops. After that, the sea system reservoir will be empty, and the rat will just be spinning in air. You have 20 minutes to land this plane." A new voice came over the headset. It was cracked, weak, and utterly broken. It was Captain Matteo Jensen. "Mr. Vance, Elijah, we can't make Gander. Not in 20 minutes. Not at this altitude. We're too heavy. It'll take 40 minutes to get down." Elijah's heart stopped. 40 minutes. The sea system would be bone dry in 20. "Then you'd better hope for a miracle, Captain," Elijah said, his voice raw. "Please," Jensen whispered. It was the sound of a god collapsing. "The landing gear. We have no sea system. We'll have to use the freefall extension. It might not lock. We'll land on the belly. We'll all... Please. Is there anything you can do?" Elijah looked at the complex maze of hydraulic lines. The sea system was bleeding out. The pump was dead. The rat was a temporary fix. Wait, the pump was electric. The motor was seized. But the pump mechanism itself... "What if?" "Read," Elijah said, ignoring Jensen. "The seized pump. The breaker for it, it's right here. Panel C14. I'm going to try something. I'm going to jolt it." "Jolt it?" "Vance, it's seized. You'll start the fire for sure." "No, I've cooled it. It's not red hot anymore. The motor is seized, but if I can get it to turn, even one revolution, it might clear the jam. It's the only chance we have." Elijah placed his hand on the circuit breaker. It was hot to the touch. He thought of his sister, Sarah, waiting in London. He thought of Jensen's sneering face. "Try not to get any grease on the upholstery." He grabbed the breaker. "Reed, tell me if the pump fault light changes. Even for a second. I'm going in. 3, 2, 1. Now." He shoved the breaker in. A terrifying, grinding screech filled the bay. The lights in the EE bay flickered. A shower of blue sparks erupted from the pump's housing. The entire plane shuddered violently. And then, clunk. The screaming stopped. The high-pitched whine of the rat was joined by the steady, healthy whoomp, whoomp, whoomp of the auxiliary pump. Elijah stared at the pressure gauge. 500, 1,000, 2,000, 2,800, 3,000 psi. It held. "Read!" Elijah screamed, tears of relief and adrenaline streaming down his face. "We have pressure. I've got the pump. It's holding." The leak was still there. The transducer was still broken, but the pump was working, fighting against the leak, generating enough pressure to keep the system alive. "Holy!" Reed's voice was pure awe. "We have full controls. Vance, we have the C system back. We have flaps. We have gear. You did it! You did it!" "It's not going to last," Elijah yelled, watching the stream of skydroll still pouring from the crack. "The pump is working, but it's dumping our fluid. You still have a time limit, but it's longer than 20 minutes. Now get this damn plane on the ground." The next 40 minutes were the longest in Elijah Vance's life. He stayed in the EE bay, a self-appointed guardian of the crippled hydraulic system. He couldn't leave. The fix was a patchwork of ice, napkins, and a champagne bucket shield. The pump he'd jolted back to life was running on borrowed time, groaning under the strain, but running nonetheless. "Vance, Gander approach has us," Reed's voice crackled. "Weather is not good. Crosswinds at 30 knots, gusting to 45. Visibility is 800 meters. It's going to be a rough one." "It's always a rough one," Elijah muttered, bracing himself against an avionics rack. He could feel the plane descending, the subtle change in pressure, the new vibrations as the flaps and slats began to deploy, fighting the wind. Each movement was powered by the C system, by his pump. "Gear. C system is extending landing gear," Reed narrated, his voice tight. Elijah heard the familiar, heavy thud of the main gear locking into place. Then the nose gear. "3 green," Reed shouted, a note of triumph in his voice. "We have 3 green, Vance. The gear is down and locked." Echo his sister's face. "To the hospital in London. Not like this. Not today." "Vance, 500 feet." Reed's voice was a whisper. "Matteo he's not flying. I am. I've got the controls." "You can do it, Reed," Elijah said, his knuckles white. "Just fly the numbers. Let her settle." "Too fast. Crosswind." The plane lurched violently to the left. A gust had caught them. "Correcting," Reed yelled. Elijah felt the rudder pedals move through the airframe, the C system fighting the wind. 100 feet, 50, 40. The automated voice in the cockpit called out, 20, 10. With a collision that felt like a building collapsing, the main gear slammed into the asphalt of Gander's runway 22. It wasn't a landing. It was a controlled crash. Elijah was thrown against the bulkhead, his head cracking against a metal panel. His headset flew off. The EE bay was plunged into a symphony of screaming tires and groaning metal. The nose gear hit, jarring every bone in his body. He heard the roar of the engines in full reverse thrust. He smelled smoke, burning rubber. The plane was skidding, crabbing sideways down the runway. Reed was fighting for control, but without full rudder, the crosswind was winning. The C system, it was failing. No. The plane veered, and Elijah was convinced they were about to flip. He braced for the sound of the wingtip dragging, for the cartwheeling explosion. And then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. The plane shuddered to a final, complete stop. Silence. A profound, absolute, deafening silence. The engine spooled down. For a second, the only sound was Elijah's own ragged breathing in the dark, smoky bay. Then, from the cabin above, he heard a single person start to clap. Then another. And another. Within seconds, the entire aircraft had erupted in a chaotic, hysterical, thunderous wave of applause and sobbing. Elijah Vance, covered in sweat, ice water, and a fine mist of caustic skydroll, leaned his head against the warm avionics rack, and closed his eyes. The hatch above him was ripped open. Bright light flooded the bay. It was Chloe, her face streaked with tears. "Elijah!" she cried. Are you okay?" He just nodded, too exhausted to speak. "He's here! He's okay!" she yelled to the cabin. Elijah fumbled for the ladder and slowly, painfully, pulled himself up. As his head emerged into the first-class galley, the applause doubled. The passengers were all on their feet, the businessman, the woman with the pearls, all of them, their faces masks of tearful gratitude, staring at him. At the mechanic from 2A, he stumbled into the galley, his legs shaking. The cockpit door opened. First Officer David Reed came out. He walked straight to Elijah, his eyes red. He didn't say a word. He just grabbed Elijah in a fierce, desperate hug, burying his face in the mechanic's shoulder. "You saved us," Reed wept. "You saved us all." Elijah just patted his back. "We saved us, son. You flew her home." Over Reed's shoulder, Elijah saw Captain Matteo Jensen. He was still in the cockpit, visible through the open door. He wasn't celebrating. He was slumped in his pilot's chair, his head in his hands. His hat had fallen to the floor. He was a small, broken man, utterly destroyed. He didn't even look up. The Gander tarmac was a world of flashing alien light. It was 4:30 a.m. local time, and the fog was so thick it seemed to swallow the blue and red strobes of the emergency vehicles, blurring them into a watercolor of panic and relief. Fire trucks, their heavy diesel engines rumbling, had already coated the smoking hot landing gear of N774AP in a layer of white preventative foam. The air that rushed in when the cabin door was finally opened was cold, sharp, and tasted of the North Atlantic, jet fuel and salvation. As the 304, shaken, weeping, and dazed passengers deplaned via the mobile stairs, they filed past the forward galley. Elijah Vance was standing there, leaning against a bulkhead, his clothes soaked in a mixture of sweat, ice water, and the pungent, chemical smell of Skydroll. He was running on pure, hollow-core adrenaline. He was no longer the imposter in 2A. He was the guardian of the hatch. They didn't just walk past him, they reached for him. A businessman, the one who had been typing furiously on his laptop, gripped Elijah's forearm, his own hand trembling. I have no words," he stammered, his voice thick. My children. Thank you." The woman with the pearls, her immaculate hair now a mess, simply touched her fingers to her lips and then pressed them to Elijah's shoulder, a silent, tearful blessing. A young mother, clutching her sleeping toddler, paused. "We heard you," she whispered, her eyes wide with a kind of holy terror. "We heard you on the speaker. We heard you fighting for us." Elijah just nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He was a mechanic. He wasn't used to this. He was used to the quiet satisfaction of a signed logbook, the anonymous job well done. This raw, desperate gratitude was overwhelming, a weight almost as heavy as the responsibility he'd just carried. When the last passenger was off, 3 figures climbed the stairs, their movements sharp and official, cutting through the emotional chaos. 2 were in the dark blue, broad-shouldered uniforms of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. The third, in the middle, was a man in a dark suit and a long, severe-looking overcoat. He looked rumpled, as if he'd been pulled from bed, but his eyes were sharp and intensely focused. "Mr. Elijah Vance?" the man in the suit asked. His voice was American, a sharp contrast to the Canadian accents of the ground crew. "Yes, sir," Elijah said, straightening up instinctively. The adrenaline was fading, and a deep, bone-aching exhaustion was setting in. He could feel a burn on his forearms where the Skydroll had seeped through his shirt. "Agent Thorne, NTSB," the man said, flashing a badge. National Transportation Safety Board. We have a field office here, left over from the old days. Good thing, too. He looked past Elijah, at the open hatch in the galley floor, the discarded ice bucket, the stained napkins. And I think we need to thank you. Profoundly. Just doing my job, Elijah murmured, the words sounding hollow even to him. No, Mr. Vance, Thorne said, his expression turning grim. Your job was on the ground in New York. What you did up here, we were monitoring your A-car's data stream. We saw the C-system pressure drop to 0. We saw the route deploy. And then, we saw something impossible. We saw the auxiliary pump come back online. We were listening to the CVR, the cockpit voice recorder, on a live feed after you declared the emergency. We heard everything. Thorne's eyes flicked toward the open cockpit door. We heard your diagnosis. We heard your instructions. And we heard the hesitation from the flight deck. He took a deep breath. We need your official statement. But first, I believe we need to speak with the captain. Elijah nodded, pushing himself off the bulkhead. He walked with Agent Thorne and the two silent, imposing RCMP officers to the cockpit. The scene inside was one of quiet devastation. The complex symphony of lights on the instrument panel was still flashing amber and red warnings. The air was thick with the smell of sweat and fear. First Officer David Reed was in his co-pilot's seat, his headset still on, methodically running the post-shutdown checklist, his hands moving with a precise, almost robotic calm. Captain Matteo Ellington Jensen was in the left seat. He was doing nothing. He was slumped, his hat off, his silver hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. He was staring at the yoke, at his own hands, as if he no longer knew what they were for. He hadn't been flying. When the plane was falling apart, he had frozen. Reed had landed the plane. Jensen had simply been cargo. Captain Jensen, Agent Thorne said, his voice cold and formal, filling the small space. Jensen looked up. His eyes, once so cold and arrogant, were now just empty. They were glassy, vacant, and utterly broken. He saw Thorne. He saw the police, and then he saw Elijah, standing behind them, his face smudged with grease, his shirt stained with hydraulic fluid. In that single terrible moment, Matteo Jensen saw it all. He saw the man he had mocked in the lounge. He saw the passenger he had tried to humiliate and shoo from first class. He saw the grease monkey whose warning, buried in a maintenance log he'd arrogantly deferred, had just become the single most important document of his life. He saw the man who had, against all odds, fixed the very plane the pilot had broken. He saw the witness to his failure. He saw the man who had saved his life, and in doing so, had ended it. The hard, cold, undeniable karma had finally landed. It wasn't a lightning bolt. It was the quiet, sterile click of an NTSB agent's pen. Captain Matteo Ellington Jensen, Thorne continued, pulling a small notebook from his pocket. We have the A-car's data. We have the CVR feed. And we have a copy of the MEL 29-1101, which you signed off on at JFK, deferring critical maintenance on the C-system pressure transducer against a logged mechanics warning. Jensen's mouth opened, a dry, gasping sound. The pressure was 0, Captain, Thorne snapped. And you froze. First Officer Reed, he said, turning to the co-pilot. Is it true you assumed command of the aircraft? Reed stopped his checklist. He looked at Jensen, not with pity, but with a cold, professional anger. Yes, sir, Agent Thorne. I did. He then looked directly at Elijah. But I only flew it. He saved it. And, sir, for the record, Captain Jensen didn't just defer the maintenance. He verbally harassed Mr. Vance at the gate and again at his seat because he was a mechanic flying first class. The two RCMP officers shifted, their expressions hardening. This wasn't just negligence. This was malice. Thorne's face was a mask of disgust. "Captain Jensen, as of this moment, 04 to 38, Zulu, per FAA and Transport Canada Authority, your flight credentials and all associated licenses are suspended, pending a full investigation into gross negligence and conduct unbecoming. You will surrender your license. Now." Jensen's hands were shaking so violently he couldn't unbutton his breast pocket. He fumbled, his fingers useless. Finally, he managed to pull out his wallet and extract the small plastic card that represented his life, his career, his entire identity, his family's legacy. He held it out. He couldn't look at Thorne. He couldn't look at Reed. His eyes were fixed on Elijah, a desperate, silent plea for an absolution he would never receive. Elijah just watched, his face impassive. He felt no triumph, no joy, just a profound, weary sadness. Thorne took the license. "An officer will escort you to the terminal. You will be interviewed, and then you will find your own way home. You are not to fly, operate, or in any way interface with a commercial or private aircraft. Do you understand me?" "Yes," Jensen whispered. It was the only word he'd said. He slowly, stiffly, unbuckled himself. He picked up his hat, the symbol of his authority, now just a piece of cloth. He stumbled out of the cockpit, past Elijah, his shoulders slumped. He didn't look back. The two RCMP officers followed him down the stairs, their boots heavy on the metal steps. He was a captain with no ship, a pilot with no wings, a ghost in a uniform. Elijah, his role played, turned and walked out of the plane he knew so well, down the stairs, and onto the solid, beautiful, unmoving tarmac. An hour later, Elijah was in the Gander Airport's small, surprisingly plush VIP lounge. He had been given a new, dry Apex Airlines polo shirt and a hot, sweet coffee that burned his throat. A local paramedic had treated the chemical burns on his arms, bandaging them neatly. A woman with a kind, exhausted face and a global Apex name badge entered the room. "Mr. Vance, I'm Sarah. I'm the station manager here." She looked at him with an undisguised awe. We've been in contact with corporate, with the CEO, Mr. Harrison." I just need to get to London," Elijah said, the exhaustion making his voice thick. "My sister, she's sick. That's why I was—" "Mr. Vance." "Elijah," Sarah said, sitting down opposite him. "Mr. Harrison was woken up an hour ago. He was— well, I've never heard him like that. He was screaming. Then he was quiet. He was listening to a live feed of Agent Thorne's debrief. He knows everything. The deferral. The incident at Seat 2A. Everything." She leaned forward, her eyes shining. "He asked me to tell you 3 things. First, the $10,000 bonus you received for the Maintenance Excellence Award. He called it an insult. He has personally wired an additional $20,000 in your name to the Bupa Cromwell Hospital in London. Your sister's treatment for the next 6 months. It's covered. It was confirmed 10 minutes ago." Elijah's hands started to shake so hard, the coffee cup rattled in its saucer. "What?" "Second," Sarah continued, her voice soft. "He said that's not good enough. A Gulfstream GV medical transport jet, one of the best in the world, is wheels up from Montreal right now. It is not going to Gander. It is flying directly to London. A specialist team from the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, is already on a flight to meet your sister. They are picking her up and flying her to the Mayo Clinic. Mr. Harrison has personally guaranteed all of it. The flight, the treatment, her accommodations, all of it. Indefinitely." Elijah just stared, the words not making sense, The weight of the last 3 hours, the fear, the adrenaline, and now this impossible kindness. It broke him. The tears he'd held back in the EE bay, the tears he'd refused to shed in front of Jensen, now streamed freely down his face. "And third," Sarah said gently, pointing out the window. Through the fog on the other side of the tarmac, Elijah saw a small, impossibly sleek private jet, a Gulfstream G50. Its lights were on. "That's for you," Sarah said. "It's Mr. Harrison's personal jet. It will take you directly to Rochester, Minnesota. You will be there to meet your sister when she lands." Elijah looked out that window, past the G650, and he saw him. On a concrete barrier near the cargo terminal, far from the flashing lights and the official cars, sat a lone, hunched figure. It was Matteo Jensen. His hat was on the ground beside him. He was just a man in an expensive uniform, staring at the broken 777 he would never fly again, a pariah in the pre-dawn fog. Elijah thought of Jensen's words, the sneer, the casual cruelty. "Try not to get any grease on the upholstery." Elijah Vance, the grease monkey, was about to board a G650. Captain Jensen, the aviation royalty, was sitting on a concrete curb with no way home. Elijah took a long, slow sip of his coffee. He set the cup down. He looked at Sarah, the station manager. "Sarah," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "Please, before I go, get a message to your ground crew chief. It's about N774 AP. She's grounded, obviously. But tell them they need to order a new C-system auxiliary pump and a new pressure transducer. It's a Parker Hannafin, model 33B. And tell them to check the wiring on the C14 breaker in the EE bay. I think I might have scorched it." He stood up, his bandaged arms at his sides. He was a mechanic, and he had a job to do. Elijah Vance got to the hospital and was there to hold his sister's hand when she arrived. His skill, his professionalism, and his quiet dignity saved 345 lives. For Captain Matteo Jensen, the karma was swift and absolute. He was stripped of his license and faced a federal investigation for criminal negligence, his family's legacy ending in a cloud of disgrace and hydraulic fluid. Elijah's story is a powerful, real-life reminder that a person's worth is not determined by their uniform, their seat number, or the assumptions others make. It's determined by their character and their actions in the moments that matter. The pilot saw a grease monkey. The world saw a hero. If you believe that karma is real, and that heroes can be found in the engine bay as well as the cockpit, like this video, share this incredible story with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more true stories where pride comes before the fall. Let us know in the comments, what's the most powerful example of workplace karma you've ever seen?